Imagine this: an aristocratic girl from the Scottish countryside, piercing her nose with a safety pin at 16, wearing secondhand men's clothes, buzzing off her hair, and somehow, just a few years later, she's on the runway for Chanel, face of Versace, redefining beauty for an entire generation. Stella Tennant didn't look like a model. She looked like a rebellion. She wasn't loud, she wasn't polished, but she was arresting. Karl Lagerfeld once called her the Coco Chanel of the 90s. And for a moment, it seemed like fashion had finally found a new kind of icon. Androgynous, unbothered, unshakably cool. But here's the part nobody saw. The more Stella became a symbol, the less she felt like herself. She didn't chase fame, she resisted it. But fame came anyway, loud, fast, and demanding. And on December 22nd, 2020, 5 days after her 50th birthday, Stella Tennant was gone. No scandal, no public warning, just a single line from her family. She had been unwell for some time. To the world, it was shocking. To those closest to her, maybe not, because Stella had spent a lifetime hiding behind an image she never asked for. She made it look easy, but perfection in the end became her prison. You think you know her story? You only know the surface. Now, let's talk about what was underneath. She was born into a world of silk curtains, stone walls, and centuries-old expectations. But from the beginning, Stella Tennant was not made to follow the script. Born on December 17, 1970, Stella was the granddaughter of Andrew Cavendish, the 11th Duke of Devonshire, one of Britain's most powerful aristocrats. Her mother, Lady Emma Cavendish, grew up in the grand halls of Chatsworth House, one of England's most iconic, stately homes. This was old money, the kind of wealth where your name came with a title and your future came pre-written. Debutante balls, polo matches, marriage to the right man. That was the path expected of a girl like Stella. But she had other plans. She didn't care for gowns or dinner parties. She cared about clay, welding tools, and secondhand band tees. While her classmates practiced posture, Stella pierced her nose with a safety pin. At 16, she buzzed off her hair in the family bathroom mirror, not to shock, but to feel like herself. Her parents were horrified. Their friends whispered. But Stella felt free. She wasn't rebelling for attention. She was rejecting the world she was told to belong to, before it had the chance to define her. By the time she enrolled at Winchester School of Art to study sculpture, she had already decided that traditional femininity was a costume she would never wear. She dressed in old men's suits. She wore combat boots. She barely wore makeup. In her own words, "I wasn't trying to be beautiful. I was trying to be honest." And it showed. Even surrounded by artists and misfits, Stella stood out, not just for her look, but for her presence. Quiet, smart, and somehow always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. She dreamed of opening a studio, making sculptures that challenged how we saw form, identity, beauty. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted to make people see differently. But the world had other plans. Because in 1993, someone at British Vogue heard about the punk-looking girl from the art school. And when she walked into that casting studio, no agent, no experience, no clue, fashion would never be the same. The first time Stella Tennant stood in front of Stephen Meisel's lens, she didn't pose. She simply existed. And that was enough to change everything. In 1993, the British Vogue editorial Anglo-Saxon Attitudes needed something different. Not another supermodel, not another fantasy. They needed someone real, but still unforgettable. Stella walked in with no agent, no portfolio, and no idea what the industry expected from her. She had never done a professional shoot before. She wore thrift store jeans and a vintage t-shirt. Her hair was cropped close to the scalp. Her septum ring glinted under studio lights. And she looked like she couldn't care less about impressing anyone. But Meisel saw it instantly. The cheekbones, the posture, That cool, unreadable stare. "She doesn't look like anyone else," he reportedly whispered. At first, she was awkward, didn't know how to find her light, didn't know what her angles were. But Meisel stopped her mid-shoot and said, "Stop trying, just be." And suddenly, she became magnetic. The images were electric, androgynous, stark, powerful. She wasn't selling clothes, she was challenging the camera to keep up with her. Within weeks, every major editor in London and Paris wanted to know, who is this girl? And one of them was Karl Lagerfeld. The Chanel designer saw Meisel's photos and called her the new Coco Chanel. Not for her beauty, though she had plenty of that, but for her ability to challenge everything the industry thought it knew about femininity. Lagerfeld invited Stella to Paris. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't chasing fashion, but when Chanel calls, you go. Her first Chanel campaign dropped like a bomb. Stella in the signature tweed suit. Cropped hair, no smile, eyes like blades. She wasn't soft, she was sharp. Almost overnight, the Stella look went viral. Hair salons were flooded with women demanding Stella's short, boyish cut. Androgyny became aspirational. Elegance became edgy. At Versace, she walked like a warrior. At McQueen, she became living sculpture. At Calvin Klein, she made minimalism feel dangerous. She didn't adapt to fashion. Fashion adapted to her. Stella's contradictions became her power. She was noble, but punk. Masculine, but stunningly feminine. Cold on the outside, quietly radiant on the inside. By 1996, she was everywhere. Magazine covers, ad campaigns, front rows. The girl who once pierced her own nose with a safety pin was now the face of global luxury. But here's the thing. She never looked like she belonged to it. Not completely. Even at the height of her fame, Stella kept her distance. She turned down after parties. She skipped interviews. She went home early. And yet, every time she returned to the runway, the room stopped. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to sell. She was the moment, because she never tried to be. But beneath the buzz cuts and black eyeliner, attention was growing. The fashion world saw a rebel. But Stella? She was already wondering if this world was ever truly hers. From the outside, Stella Tennant was the picture of effortlessness. Cool, composed, in control. But inside, something else was happening. Something no one saw, because she was so good at hiding it. What the world called effortless was, in truth, a machine. Endless fittings, red eyes across continents, smiling while her bones ached and her brain begged for rest. Stella was never interested in being famous. She didn't crave attention. But now, she couldn't walk down the street without being recognized for a version of herself she barely understood. And somewhere along the way, the girl who had rejected convention became trapped in her own myth. Fashion labeled her the aristocratic rebel. Every campaign, every casting reinforced that image. And when she tried to step back, the industry pulled her in harder. "I didn't really know if I wanted to open the door and see what was inside," she admitted in one interview. "I thought it was a big, shallow world, and I wasn't really sure I liked the look of it." But the world liked the look of her. Too much. By 1999, she married French photographer David Lasnet, someone who understood the chaos behind the lens. They started a life in the countryside. 4 children. A slower pace. A different dream. For a while, it looked like she'd made it out. Like she'd rewritten the ending. But the fashion world doesn't let its icons vanish quietly. Even as Stella pulled back, the offers kept coming. Selective, prestigious, well-paid. She chose carefully. But each return reminded her she was aging in an industry that feared age. Her angular beauty, the very thing that made her famous, was now softened by time. The lines around her eyes told stories the camera didn't want to hear. And while she embraced the change, the world around her didn't. The same editors who had once praised her authenticity now politely called her timeless. Code for past her prime, but still useful, if styled correctly. Then came the divorce. After 21 years together, she and Lasnit quietly separated in 2020. The official statement was warm, mutual. But to those who knew Stella, it was clear. Another foundation had cracked. Her children were grown, her marriage was over, and the career that once gave her power now offered only echoes. And then, the pandemic. Fashion went quiet, runways stopped, the world slowed down. For Stella, it should have been a blessing. Time to breathe, reflect, begin again. But for someone who had spent 3 decades being told exactly who she was, freedom felt terrifying. Back at her family estate in Scotland, the same hills where she'd first shaved her head and pierced her nose as a teenager, she found herself alone. No makeup teams, no cameras, just silence. But this time, the silence didn't feel like strength. It felt like isolation. The woman who once commanded runways now questioned her reflection, not for how she looked, but for who she was without the noise. Her family would later say, gently but clearly, she had been unwell for some time. She was struggling with something deeper than image, something that had been building for years. Because when your whole life has been built around difference, what happens when you no longer feel different enough? When you've spent decades proving that beauty can be androgynous, imperfect, rebellious. But secretly, you're still measuring yourself against the same impossible standards? On December 22nd, 2020, 5 days after her 50th birthday, Stella Tennant was gone. The official cause of death was suicide. But the real cause was more complicated. It was the weight of decades spent being seen, but not known, admired, but not understood, packaged, but never fully free. She had everything: legacy, success, a beautiful family. But not the one thing that mattered most: the freedom to be imperfect. Stella Tennant never staged a grand comeback. She didn't need to, because even as she stepped back, her influence only deepened. In the 2000s, while many of her peers chased reinvention, Stella chose stillness. She raised her children in the countryside. She took only the jobs that felt true. And somehow, that made her presence even louder. She reappeared in campaigns for Hermès, Burberry, and again, Chanel. But now, it wasn't about being the face of rebellion. It was about being a woman who had lived. She brought lines to the lens, not to be airbrushed away, but to be seen. She reminded the industry, beauty doesn't vanish. It evolves. And the industry listened. In 2010, she walked in the London Olympics closing ceremony, representing British fashion alongside Naomi Campbell and Kate Moss, wearing gold McQueen. Fierce as ever, no longer the it girl, now the icon. Stella's legacy didn't live in hashtags. It lived in the eyes of young girls who didn't look like Cindy Crawford, but still believed they were beautiful. It lived in the androgynous wave of early 2000s fashion, in editorials where buzz cuts and flat shoes and blank stares became the look. Designers called her timeless. But it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about principle. She never sold out. She never played the fame game. She never let fashion turn her into a caricature of herself. Instead, she turned fashion into something else, a space where contradiction could be powerful, where a woman could be both masculine and sensual, both aristocrat and outsider, both elegant and unknowable. She made it okay to be quiet in a room full of people screaming for attention. Her death, when it came, shook the industry, precisely because it seemed impossible. Stella, the one who had it all together, the one who never cracked, but that was the illusion, one she never intended to create, but had been forced to maintain. And in that way, Stella left behind more than campaigns and covers. She left behind a question. What is the cost of being different in a world that only wants you to be different on its terms? Her story forced fashion to pause, to ask itself, what happens when we celebrate uniqueness, but make no room for the human underneath? The tributes poured in, designers, editors, artists, friends. But the most powerful voices came from people she'd never met. The queer kids who saw themselves in her angular features. The girls who'd been told they were too tall, too thin, too strange, until they saw Stella. The women aging in a world that told them not to. Stella never preached. She didn't give TED Talks. She didn't build a brand. She just lived, with quiet defiance. And in doing so, she reshaped fashion's idea of beauty, not with noise, not with fame, but with presence. She was never trying to be seen, but somehow she became unforgettable. Stella Tennant didn't chase fame. She didn't chase anything. And maybe that's why it all chased her. She walked into fashion by accident and ended up changing its DNA. She proved that beauty could be angular, that elegance could be androgynous, that power didn't need volume. But here's the truth no one wants to say. We loved her because she felt above it all. And then we forgot to ask what that isolation might cost. Stella didn't burn out. She faded, quietly, intentionally, until she couldn't anymore. She didn't leave behind a brand, a legacy perfume, a billion-dollar empire. She left behind an idea that maybe, just maybe, being different is the bravest thing you can be. And being soft is not the same as being weak. So now we ask you, what do you remember most about Stella? The buzz cut, the stare, the silence, or the way she made you feel? Like beauty didn't need to explain itself? Tell us in the comments. Tell us what she taught you about style, about strength, about softness, because Stella Tennant didn't invent the look. She lived it, unapologetically, unforgettably, and in the end, on her own terms.